I felt that there was just so many variables left unaccounted for when it came to getting things under control. It always seems to be a cycle where going through different methods, trying different things, only to end up eventually back in that counting mode. It's not that the willingness and dedication is lacking remotely in the services that I've seen and tried, of course. You're treated very well in all of them.
Yeah.
So it seems to just be a product issue at the end of the day, in my opinion. I felt that there was just so many variables left unaccounted for when it came to getting things under control. Something repeatable in order to get that paradigm shift in gear.
Hi mate, how's it going? So Joe, what made you actually start this business?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, ideally, I would have never sort of entered this business. And so after being in an active addiction to porn for the best part of 20 years, only recently being able to stop correctly spending $10,000 on these paid programs. So that all stopped when I met Tom Molyneux and Mary Paulus at the start of 2025, and they introduced me to what's known as the Beyond Compulsion method. It focuses on rewiring addicted neural pathways. It doesn't focus on self-development or diving back into your past or the other stuff from the no-fap world that we classically try, and it really focuses on rational emotive behavior, separates a lot of the noise that we typically see within the no-fap space or willpower space, as I like to call it, and gives us a real accurate take as to what's going on under the hood, what's going on in the mind, how all these thought patterns invoked by these addicted neural pathways, invoked by the addiction itself, keep us in the addiction. And just shining a light on that gives us a lot more clarity. The best part of the method that I learned from Tom and Mary was the simplicity of it all, the repeatability of it all. You're not wondering, what I have to do or what moment. You know exactly what to do in whatever position that you're in. If you're feeling urges in this way, you respond to it this way. If you're in a certain thinking pattern and you know that it's leading you down towards like a compulsive sort of series of thoughts to cover all the bases, cover all these unanswerable questions that we typically have in a full-time addiction. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty safe to say that life is very different now, coming from a completely different angle, not worrying about when an urge is about to hit, being prepared, not feeling that panicking feeling before, I'm going to relapse now, and all that sort of noise that happens that we're all really used to. A really sort of refreshing take on the whole problem. And so the bottom line is, this is the product that me and Tom, back in the days of being deep in the addiction, this is the product that we would have wanted, back 10 years ago when we wanted to try and stop. And so now I'm just compelled to be able to provide this solution and be that guy to just plug everyone up with the right thing.
So Joe, what's your thoughts on Imperium Academy and Easy Grow?
So I mean, Imperium Academy has been doing a lot of heavy lifting recently. I mean, it's got a lot of people, back into business. So in 2024, in the Easy Grow 1.0, went through it, built up skills, and we actually made some money. Now we've got Imperium Academy. Now I'm at that program. After having been in a different business, having been in a different niche, transferring over to this one is also, another no-brainer kind of thing. But Imperium Academy has been pretty good so far and really refreshing. It's great for people to start the business, go over the fundamentals, especially if you're in a coaching or an info-based product, it's a pretty bedrock of a foundation to your business education. So yeah, it's perfect for me. So the pain that our customers typically come to us with was exactly the same pain that, I felt being stuck in that addiction for so long. So when I was in the addiction, it was a very, confusing time, because one of the factors was, even though I was improving in different areas of my life, even though I was sort of, upgrading my life year by year in perhaps like a monetary sense, or working on my career, working on my physical health, etc. All the other stuff that we're actually typically told to improve on in a typical pornography addiction recovery program, right? And it was frustrating because ultimately I would just end up back exactly where I started, relapsing, going back in the cycle, constant mental conflict. And honestly, that was the worst part of it. There I was doing all these things, expecting a sort of mental change or a change in paradigm, self-improvement, self-discovery, forced abstinence. None of this stuff was working for me while trying really hard to stop. And then it comes back to, the very common thought that a lot of us who are in this addiction had. And it's the thought that, that there's something wrong with me. There's something inherently sort of wrong with the way my brain is wired. Why can't I stop? Everyone else seems to stop. Because, you read the, the comments on the NoFap forum, for example, and you see that guys are able to stop successfully. And then back in the depths of your mind, you'll think, well, these guys find it easy. There must be just something special about my case that I can't quit, and maybe I'm just like a addicted person and I have an addicted personality. And I was so, far from the reality, but, at the time you don't really pick up on these things. And that's, it's very difficult. So, a common story that a lot of us sort of tell ourselves is that pornography is one of the hardest bosses to be. It's the final boss of addictions, right? And after I'd spent all that money and all that time on other paid programs in order to stop, I then, adopted the mentality of, right, it's very important for me for somebody to be able to break down the problem, someone who's able to demonstrate a robust understanding of the problem at hand. It became very important for me to ascertain that the people that were helping me stop my behavior with porn really had a good understanding of the problem at hand, understanding of the inner workings of a full-time porn addiction, the understanding of, the inner world a person has to experience when they can't seem to stop watching porn. And, when I finally met Tom and Mary, who, helped me to actually stop the behavior, they just came in at the right time in my life. And, when I first got on a call with Tom, we just got to work straight away. And it was just a very refreshing sort of experience. Yeah, we'll definitely cover, the other sort of methods that I tried and the principles a lot of coaches in the industry also, adopt as a centerpiece, stuff such as self-improvement, recovery from trauma with the strong emotions attached to it, meditation, and the list goes on. One of the most, painful moments that someone who's been trying to stop watching porn for years and years experiences that feeling when a new year comes around. And it's either one of two feelings. Either one, you'll be very motivated and to try and find a new answer, to try and stop, trying a new method and hoping that it works, right? And typically it ends up in a relapse and the same disappointment comes again. And you're also, thinking about that as well, which ends up not being very, motivating, right? The second sort of feeling that someone also experiences in the same context is, damn, another year of this, another year of not stopping, another year of having to deal with the addiction that I can't stop and all the negative consequences that come with it, especially that constant mental conflict, the feelings of shame, the guilt, and really just feeling a bit clueless because of all the stuff that you've tried, all the stuff that you've been recommended, you have this sort of standard in your mind of, damn, pornography is just, I can't have it in my life anymore. And that's another problematic mentality to also cover, probably a bit later. Yeah, it's a very sort of exhausting emotion to sort of deal with. And it's not enjoyable.
Wait.
Hey mate, how's it going? Yeah, so Joe, you were talking earlier about trauma and dealing with trauma and how that's not necessarily an effective way of dealing with porn recovery, essentially. Yeah, can you just tell us a bit more about that and what your thinking was along those lines?
So a lot of clients that we get, they come from a series of, appointments that they've had with a therapist, right? And they typically come with the same sort of stuff, the same sort of story, that trauma was beneficial for the most part, but there was just that slight issue where the process wasn't as conducive for stopping pornography as they might have thought. So on the surface, this does seem like a very intuitive approach, right? Because there's a cause and the effect. So you have the cause, which is the trauma, and the effect, which is the porn use. So it seems pretty intuitive and sort of rational to think that this would be sort of a good idea, sort of good solution to sort of stop, a porn addiction, right? So then after doing that work, what happens is they've gone on to do the work for an indefinite amount of time, and they just end up back in the cycle. They just end up back in, the old relapsing pans, as we're all familiar with. So yeah, they just end up back in the cycle. And after receiving the right education on the situation, it just makes sense it makes sense why using trauma recovery, seeing a therapist, going to get professional help, although it is a good thing, as I will come on to after, it isn't an optimal strategy for stopping an addiction, especially for pornography in this case. So like self-improvement, using therapy as a cornerstone process of trying to stop a compulsive behavior, trying to stop an addiction to porn in this case, ends up not being effective because it's just indirect. And it doesn't deal with the addiction or its mechanisms in those critical moments of urges, as we're all familiar with. So like it might be the case that when someone was younger, they used pornography to deal with the strong emotions that are invoked by like a traumatic experience. And so pair that with perhaps boredom or feelings of just wanting to watch porn in general. But that said person could go to a professional to get help, to get professional help, to get clarity on their trauma, and they could go ahead and do that work. And they could actually be very successful in sort of ascertaining and unpacking that trauma. It could end up in like more awareness of what happened when they were younger. And this is a good thing, but as a strategy to stop a compulsive behavior, to stop an addiction to pornography especially, it just quickly happens that we just discover that it's not as effective as we first expected it to be. Because doing the deep work, it doesn't stop the wanting for pornography, because don't forget, over the years and years that you've been using pornography, all those years of engaging in the addiction, it's kept those neural pathways alive. It's made those neural pathways more used to the addiction, more evolved to trying to receive that mind mood altering experience. And so because that's already established, whether or not you've solved the trauma, you still have this problem to deal with, which is why it's so hard in those periods of withdrawal to feel like you're in control. And so the way to circumvent this is to actually address the urges, to deal with the urges in the moment when they come up. And so once you've managed to separate addiction from the matter of trauma, in this case, you get to approach the whole problem from a lot more clarity and subsequently a lot more strength as well. And so therapy in this sense is actually, is the right thing to do. But when it comes to this situation, in this context, it's simply just recommended at the wrong time. And so when you get a lot of coaches in the industry that recommend this as part of or a cornerstone of that routine, stuff gets, very convoluted very quickly and very easily, because essentially what you want to do is separate the two. And so once you've dealt with the addiction, once you've managed to stop the addiction and had the education to handle the matter a lot more efficiently, you're able to then go to therapy after that session. Once you got the behavior under control, once you've stopped, you can then go back to therapy. You can do all the stuff that you need to do in there from a position of higher clarity, because it's not muddied by the waters of being in the addiction, the constant mental conflict of we all used to feel in that situation. And yeah, so just for the record, the coaches in BCA are very pro therapy. They're just very against it being used as sort of a wedge, as a main sort of tactic or main sort of strategy in order to overcome an addictive behavior, especially pornography.
So Joe, let us know, where are we? What are we up to right now?
So we're in a place called Poitiers. It's around central France, right? And we're in a amusement park, I would say, called Futurescope. So we went there about 20 years ago, and like 20 years later, we're back, and everything's sort of updated, new sort of effects, and we've aged up with VR and everything, and we see a lot of that here. But yeah, it's like a great theme park, and yeah, good to be back.
It always seems to be a cycle where going through different methods, trying different things. We call the situation being a circle person in BCA. You start counting days, back when you started NoFap, before moving on to whatever the next mindset or strategy is for you, only to end up eventually back in that counting mode.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, so most of the guys that join the program, and of course, we just keep anonymity as a priority. So I'd say about like 70% of the guys that join just go in privately, keep anonymous, just get their head down, and work on this transformation, which is understandable. So yeah, I would say the majority of the clients are professionals or business owners, sort of in like the range to middle age. And the funny thing is, they're all just pretty cool, normal guys. If you want to meet a bunch of cool guys, just start a porn addiction recovery business.
It's the continuous search for the next thing that might work, despite taking all those losses. And so you never really give up, of course. But it's like running into a wall over and over again.
Hey Joe, how's it going? So Joe, where are we? Where are we at?
So we're on the William of Normandy. It's a fine ship.
Fine ship indeed.
And this was the first time back on the ferry, and it's super nice. I'll try and put some footage of it for you guys to see. Yeah, we're being treated very well here.
Yeah, had a bit of a feast.
Exactly. Just behind us, there's that buffet.
Yeah, not bad.
They smashed on the food.
Alright Joe, so I want to talk about self-improvement, and the idea that self-improvement convolutes the process of porn addiction recovery.
So yeah, self-improvement is another cornerstone that a lot of coaches in the industry tend to use. However, it tends to convolute the whole process, as you put it perfectly. And it seems to be one of those mentalities that on the surface is a very intuitive one. So you have a cause and an effect. So the main idea here is to work on a skill or a process in the hopes of having that skill or process sort of changing your self-image, changing the way you see yourself, and then hoping that at some point you'll feel like you won't need to sort of use pornography anymore because you've changed the way that you see yourself. So a good example of this is like a fitness transformation, right? So you go to gym, you do the diet, and you transform your body, and therefore you're effectively feeling like a different person because you've gone through this process. And with that, you're hoping, well, if I see myself differently, that's going to sort of work towards getting rid of the need to, watch porn, getting rid of the wanting to stop it because you sort of felt that, okay, I've transcended this now, right? And so what ends up happening is that they end up feeling good about that result, right? But the wanting to watch porn is still there, like it still sticks around, and then you're there wondering, oh, maybe I've done this whole thing wrong, right? Maybe I'm just not thinking the right way. And the wanting is still there, of course, due to the fact that you already have addicted neural pathways which have been already established from all those years of, engaging again and again. So yeah, we continue to relapse, and then it keeps happening over and over again. And so the good feelings that we got from our self-improvement work, our self-improvement journey, they seem to sort of just sabotage all those good feelings, and it really sucks. And since we expected that strategy to work, we're just left all over again in that position of just feeling ashamed, feeling helpless and hopeless. The countless feelings of, right, this was one last time, but I failed again. And so that same cycle just continues over and over again. And so that the reality is that the addiction is a separate issue, and so therefore it needs to be isolated and focused on as a separate issue. It doesn't need to be this indirect approach of improving something else in the hopes that it will leave us in a strong position, a strong mental position. So the better option here is to be in an offensive, an attacking stance when facing the addicted part of the mind, processing urges as they come up directly, moment by moment, always staying in the present moment. And also, making the process of rewiring the addicted brain, the addicted neural pathways, a top priority with enthusiasm, just the same as the enthusiasm that you would use in order to build a skill or going on that, fitness transformation as we were talking about earlier. So we have that extra sort of appreciation for managing to stop and staying stopped, and those good feelings of having self-integrity, having self-trust with no shame, just keep sort of compounding like day by day as you stay stopped. It's sort of like a savings account where the wins just keep stacking up. And honestly, it's so different. It changes everything. And so one argument that someone might come along and say is, well, isn't this a form of self-improvement if I was to go on a program such as Beyond Compulsion Academy? Wouldn't that also sort of count as self-improvement? And to that, I would say, yeah, sure. This way of doing it, however, is an intentional, a targeted, a deliberate approach to specifically target the addictive mechanism, the addiction directly, rather than, using something indirect, such as self-improvement, such as a fitness transformation, in order for you to sort of feel good about things, hoping things, would work. So it's stepping away from general growth and more of a targeted, intentional approach towards, rewiring addicted neural pathways, targeting the addiction directly.
Right, Joe, bit of Mario Kart.
Bit of Mario Kart.
I've been playing this in ages.
Me neither. Last time was on an actual Nintendo rather than this beast of a machine, but I prefer this.
Yeah, fair play. Alright, Joe, so going on to something else now. What's the situation of guys that actually join the program?
So yeah, we actually cover all sorts of situations when it comes to engaging in the behaviour. Things such as fandom, findom, gooning, they're all very expected to encounter and expected sort of process of escalation of the behaviour. And so we're very used to that sort of growing list of stimuli, if you want to put it that way. And so we treat them all in exactly the same way, with the same system. So the biggest pain point that a lot of guys feel here is that they suffer from a lot of shame when it comes to the content that they engage with and that they watch. And subsequently, there's many a times where a client has been engaging in content which doesn't really align with their sexual tastes in the real world, and therefore they're in this mental conflict and understandably a lot of confusion. And so they come to us with a lot of convoluted thinking, and yes, it's really understandable.
Okay, starting again where we left off, before Mario rudely cut us up.
Yeah, so as I was saying, clients come to us with all this convoluted thinking of feeling shame, guilt, and the rest of those emotions from the content that doesn't align with their sexual tastes, right, in real life. A lot of these feelings have been built up over the years, and they've conceded to this sort of mental position where they really feel that there's something wrong with them. There is something unique with them
as to why that they can't stop watching porn, as to why they can't stop thinking about all this shame and guilt that they always feel. And I was one of those guys. And it's actually very expected, especially when it comes to most behavior with pornography. You can see that the material sort of develops over time gradually, and it's actually a lot more common than you might expect, but obviously it's not talked about openly. There's not really a incentive to do so with all the stigma attached to it, but it's very common, and it's just the reality of the situation. Just more of the same feel-good chemicals that we're already very used to. It's just hitting a higher and higher and higher baseline each time. So yeah, the tolerance cycle increasing is very expected and very normal, as unusual as that might sound. And there's absolutely, nothing wrong with a person for being in that position. They just simply haven't found the right help in order for them to stop and stay stopped successfully.
That's the other issue. When you have all these sources of information, whether it's NoFap or other ways of approaching it, that then becomes another information conflict to deal with. On top of all the constant conflict that comes from being in the addiction.
Nuances at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah, so a common belief that a lot of older guys who are looking to join the program have is that because they've been engaging for years and years, whereby those addicted neural pathways are in that strong state, those addicted neural pathways are fully active, so to speak, and all of it is temporary, of course. They may think that, they're in too deep and that it's too late for them. And so, although that thought itself is actually part of the cycle, it's understandable that, they have these doubts because of the countless one last times that they've told themselves. It comes back to that feeling where they believe that the addiction, that the compulsion is like a part of them, when of course, it isn't. And they come in with a very anxious sort of attitude towards urges, which is understandable because it's all become rather, heavy on the shoulders at this point, where all like the consequences of choosing to engage have really stacked up over the years, and they're always there with you in the back of your mind. And so, a lot of these thoughts are actually keeping us in the cycle. Those thoughts are facilitating the choice to engage, right? Because it's so compelling. We feel like, I need to relieve myself of this temporary discomfort of the urge right now. So they will go ahead and, choose to relapse, right? And so the key here is to understand how to respond to compulsive desires correctly, how to talk back to those thoughts correctly, and embrace the temporary discomfort, feeling the temporary discomfort of urges willingly, from a place of strength and power. You're not in a defensive stance, you're not in a running stance, you're not trying to willpower it through. You're coming from a position of power and strength, and that's very key. And most importantly, it's having the attitude to up your willingness in order to rewire the brain correctly. Rewire the brain actively using a tool such as the 5-fact script in BCA, getting the rational mind into the driver's seat, processing the urge efficiently, and then just moving on to continue to sail smoothly on what we call the straight line in the academy, the state of living moment by moment, choosing not to engage willingly, embracing that temporary discomfort, just repeating the same simple principles and actions over and over again when you're prompted to, connecting with that desire directly. And so the urges lessen over time as a result, and also the dramatic depletion, the dramatic reduction of that constant mental conflict, those feelings of shame, guilt, the wanting to do it but not wanting to do it, all those feelings and thoughts dramatically taken out of your life. So with that increased morale and energy that you find yourself with, it's pretty much, like
night and day. And so a lot of those sort of targets that you may have been trying to hit when you were using methods such as self-improvement, willpower, appear to slot into your life pre-organically, continue to rewire, continue to process urges in the exact same way over and over again, rewire those addicted neural pathways. Again, it's not so much whether you're a guy who might have engaged in porn daily for maybe 5+ hours per day, or somebody who perhaps held back for, like, let's say 3 or more months, no engaging, no watching pornography, and then they sort of get overwhelmed, choose to relapse in one of those critical moments, and then they're back in that sort of relapse cycle, that sort of binge period, right? The process for both scenarios is the same. They may, manifest as thoughts in different ways, but the urge mechanisms that sort of invoke that desire and the way of dealing it stays, exactly the same. So it's about going back to first principles, being proactive, having the right education to know that this compulsive behavior that's been in your life for years and years isn't anything to be afraid of anymore, and you can attack it directly with confidence.